I never expected that helping a stranger reach a box of deck screws off a high shelf would be the thing that saved my life. But when the old man at the hardware store grabbed my forearm and said, quietly and without any preamble, "Don't let anyone into your tool shed this weekend. No matter what reason they give you," something in the stillness of his eyes made me stop and listen. 3 days later, when I found what was hidden behind my late wife's old workbench, I understood exactly what he'd been trying to protect me from. And the person trying to destroy me had been calling me Dad his entire life. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived on the same 160 acres in western New Hampshire since I was 32. The land sits just outside of Keene, where the hills roll and the maple trees turn colors in October that'll make a grown man tear up if he isn't careful. My grandfather bought the original parcel with money he'd saved working the mills, and my father expanded it when the neighboring property came available in the 60s. I took it over in 1989 and built it into something I was proud of. Cleared timber carefully, maintained the pastures, kept the old farmhouse standing and solid through 35 New England winters. My wife Clara and I raised 2 children in that house. Our son came first, then our daughter, 4 years younger, who lives out in Oregon now with her husband, and our 2 grandchildren. It was Clara who made that house into a home, in all the ways a house needs to be made into one. She kept the garden. She organized the church fundraisers. She cooked Sunday dinners that drew the whole family back no matter how far they'd drifted. She died 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end, faster than any of us were prepared for. I still reach for her hand in the morning sometimes before I'm fully awake. Since she passed, the house had grown very quiet. My daughter called twice a week without fail, always checking in, always worrying in her warm and gentle way. My son had started visiting more often, which I appreciated, even if something about the visits felt slightly off in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. He'd come up from Boston on weekends, help me with projects around the property, bring his wife, stay for dinner. He was attentive in ways he hadn't been since his 20s. I told myself it was grief making him more present. Losing a mother changes a person. I chose to believe that. He called me the second weekend of March to say he was coming up that Saturday, and could he bring his truck because he wanted to help me sort through the tool shed. Clara's old gardening equipment was in there, he said, along with chemicals and old paint cans that were probably a fire hazard. "Let me help you deal with it, Dad," he said. "You shouldn't be lifting those by yourself at your age." I told him sure. Saturday was fine. I drove into Keene on Thursday morning to pick up some supplies. Sandpaper, wood glue, a new set of chisels. I'd taken up furniture making again after Clara died, partly to keep my hands busy and partly because there was something about shaping wood that quieted the kind of grief that doesn't have words. I spent most mornings now in the tool shed, building things nobody had asked for, chairs and side tables and small cabinets, leaving them in the barn in case anyone wanted them someday. The hardware store on Main Street was quiet that Thursday morning, the way small-town businesses are quiet in early March when nobody's started thinking about spring projects yet. I was reaching for a box on the top shelf, the good sandpaper in the fine grit I preferred, when I realized I was a few inches short. An old man appeared beside me almost from nowhere, lean, white-haired, maybe early 70s, wearing a canvas work coat that had seen a lot of seasons. He was already reaching for the shelf. "These the ones?" he asked, holding the box out to me. I thanked him. He smiled with the careful politeness of someone who has been courteous his whole life without making a production of it. We fell into one of those brief conversations that happen naturally in small towns between strangers. The weather, the price of lumber, nothing that meant anything. I was about to move toward the register when he turned to me with a different expression. The small talk had drained from his face, replaced by something focused and deliberate. "You're Robert Calloway," he said. It wasn't a question. I told him yes. "Your property is on Route 12, the old Calloway place. 160 acres, the farmhouse set back from the road." I felt the back of my neck prickle. I'd never seen this man before. He kept his voice low. "I know this is going to sound strange. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to hear what I'm telling you and take it seriously." He looked directly at me, with gray eyes that were sharp and unhurried at the same time. Don't let anyone into your tool shed this weekend. Whatever reason they give you, whatever it sounds like, however reasonable it seems, say no. I'm asking you to trust me on this. My heart rate climbed. I told him my son was coming to help me clean it out on Saturday. I know, he said simply. I asked him how he knew that. He reached into his coat and handed me a business card. Plain white card, name and phone number, nothing else. My name is Harold Fitch. I spent 30 years as a title examiner at the county recorder's office before I retired. Call me before Saturday. I'll explain everything I can. He held my gaze for one more moment. Please, Mr. Calloway, don't let anyone in that shed. Then he picked up his own supplies and walked to the register. And by the time I'd finished checking out, he was gone. I sat in my truck for 15 minutes in the parking lot, staring at his card and thinking, title examiner at the county recorder's office. My property on Route 12. My son coming to help clean out the shed this weekend. The combination of those specific details from a complete stranger made something cold settle in the pit of my stomach. Clara used to say, I had good instincts, but ignored them out of politeness. She was usually right. I drove home. I did not go to the shed. I called Harold Fitch that evening. He answered on the second ring. He spoke carefully, the way a person speaks when they've rehearsed something difficult and are determined to say it clearly. He told me that 2 months ago, a mortgage application had been processed at the county recorder's office. The property listed as collateral was mine. The signature on the application was mine. But Harold, who had spent 3 decades looking at title documents, had noticed something in the paperwork that troubled him. The signature was close, very close, but the notarization had irregularities he recognized from cases he'd studied years earlier. He'd started pulling the associated documents. What he found was a second mortgage filed against my property in the amount of $180,000, filed without my knowledge, signed with my name in ink that was not mine. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs weren't reliable anymore. He kept talking, steady and calm. The paralegal who had prepared the documents worked for a small firm in Boston. Harold had cross-referenced the firm against public records and found it connected to a real estate development company that had filed a purchase intent on a property matching my description, contingent on a clear title transfer by April 15th, less than 5 weeks away. I asked him what any of this had to do with my tool shed. He paused for just a moment, because whoever filed those documents needed somewhere to store the originals until the transfer was complete. Somewhere they had access to, somewhere nobody would look. He paused again. Your son's name appears in the paralegal's billing records. Mr. Calloway. I'm sorry. I thanked him. I'm not sure why. It was automatic, the habit of a polite man in a moment when politeness was meaningless. I set the phone down and sat in Clara's kitchen in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle against the cold. My son, my firstborn, the boy I had taught to identify maple from oak, to set a fence post properly, to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye. He had been coming to my house every other weekend with kindness painted across his face, and the whole time he had been preparing to take everything from me. I did not sleep much that night. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. My son pulled into the driveway at 10, his truck loaded with cardboard boxes and contractor bags. His daughter-in-law beside him, both of them cheerful and helpful, and carrying a bag of groceries from Trader Joe's because they'd thought they'd make lunch. I watched them come up the porch steps and felt something rupture quietly inside my chest. We had coffee at the kitchen table. My daughter-in-law talked about a renovation project at their condo. My son mentioned he'd been reading about conservation easements and had some ideas he wanted to share with me about the property when I was ready. He said it casually, the way you say something you've been practicing saying casually. I kept my face steady the way Clara had always said I was good at. Not the expression of agreement, but the expression of a man still listening. After coffee, my son stood and said, "Ready to tackle that shed?" I told him I'd changed my mind. I wasn't ready to sort through Clara's things yet. He sat back down. He said he understood completely. Of course, he should have thought of that. Her gardening tools and everything in there must carry a lot of memories. He said we could wait as long as I needed. He said it all very well, with genuine-sounding warmth, but I watched his jaw tighten by a fraction that he couldn't quite control. His daughter-in-law said, "Maybe just the chemical stuff, though?" Those old paint cans can really become a hazard. I said I'd dealt with paint cans my whole life and I could manage. My son tried once more after lunch. He mentioned he'd noticed the shed door didn't latch properly, and he could fix it while he was here. Might as well look inside while he was at it. I told him I'd fix the latch myself. He looked at me for a moment in a way I had never seen him look at me before. Something behind his eyes that was calculating rather than warm. It was gone in an instant. But I'd seen it, and I knew what I knew. They left at 4 o'clock. I watched the truck turn out of the driveway and disappear down Route 12, and then I sat on the porch for a while in the cold before I went to the shed. The tool shed was where I'd spent most of my life. Truthfully. Built it myself in 1993, 12 by 20 feet, insulated, with a wood stove in the corner that kept it warm enough to work in through most of the winter. Clara's gardening tools hung along the south wall, her trowels and her kneeling pad and the flat of seed trays she'd never gotten to use last spring. I stood in the doorway for a moment with the late afternoon light falling across her things and let myself feel the weight of that. Then I started looking. I pulled out boxes from under the workbench. Old hardware, spare chain, saw parts, cans of mineral spirits. I looked behind the lumber rack. I moved the stacked terracotta pots Clara had kept for seedlings. I was nearly ready to believe I had imagined the whole thing, that Harold Fitch was a peculiar old man with bad information, that my son had come up here in good faith, and I'd spent 2 days grinding my heart down for nothing. Then I moved the last section of lumber stacked against the back wall, the pieces too short to be useful that I'd been meaning to burn for 2 winters now. And there, taped flat against the wall behind them with silver duct tape, was a large manila envelope. My hands were steady when I opened it. I don't know why. They should not have been. Inside was a packet of documents held together with a binder clip. The mortgage application, bearing my signature. A power of attorney form, also bearing my signature, granting my son full legal authority over all financial and property decisions on my behalf. And beneath those, a copy of what appeared to be my last will and testament, updated 18 months ago, 2 weeks after Clara's funeral, signed and notarized, leaving the entirety of the property and my estate to my son alone, with no mention of my daughter at all. I sat down on my old stool in the cold shed and read every page twice. My real will, the one Clara and I had drawn up together with our attorney 15 years ago and updated when the grandchildren were born, split everything equally between both children. My son knew this. He had been present when we discussed it. Someone had created a replacement. Someone had signed my name to it and had it notarized with a stamp I had never seen before. Someone had done this while they were bringing me groceries and helping me stack wood and asking how I was sleeping. Behind the documents, there was one more item. A burner phone. Its battery dead. I brought it inside, charged it with an old cable from my desk drawer, and waited for it to come to life. When the screen lit up, I found a text thread. No names, just numbers. But the content was unambiguous. Dates. A dollar figure. $1.4 million for the land sale. References to the filing and the transfer date and the old man who I understood, with a quietness that was almost like peace, was me. The last message in the thread, sent 11 days ago. He's getting slower. He won't question it. I photographed every document. I photographed every page of every text exchange. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it, taped the envelope to the wall behind the lumber, and restacked the wood pieces precisely as they had been. Monday morning, I drove to my attorney's office in Concord. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had handled my estate planning for 20 years and who had known Clara. She listened without expression while I described what I had found. Then she pulled up the county recorder's database on her computer and confirmed what Harold had told me. The mortgage was filed. The power of attorney was on record. The fraudulent will had been submitted to the probate office as a courtesy filing, which meant that when I died, it would be the version of record, unless contested. She picked up her phone and called the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. Then she called the county sheriff. Then she looked at me across her desk and said, "Robert, I want you to know this is going to be hard, but you came in here in time. That matters more than anything else right now." I met Harold Fitch for coffee that afternoon at a diner on Main Street. He was already at the table when I arrived, his hands wrapped around a mug, watching the door. He stood when I came in and shook my hand with both of his. I asked him how long he had known. He said he'd found the irregularities in the mortgage filing 6 weeks ago. He'd spent those 6 weeks trying to confirm what he suspected before approaching me, because he knew what it would mean when he said it. He said he'd made a mistake once before, a long time ago, of not acting quickly enough when he had information like this. He didn't make that mistake twice. I asked him what had happened before. He was quiet for a moment, turning his mug in his hands. Then, he told me, 20 years ago, his own son had been involved in a property fraud scheme. A different scheme, a different state, but the same essential anatomy. Harold had found out, had hesitated, had told himself there must be an explanation, had waited 2 weeks longer than he should have. By the time he went to the authorities, his son had transferred 3 properties that didn't belong to him, and the damage to the victims, elderly homeowners, every one of them, was done. His son had served 5 years. Harold had spent 20 years since then watching for patterns he recognized, the way a man who has survived a shipwreck watches the horizon differently for the rest of his life. "The paralegal who prepared your documents," Harold said, setting down his mug. "He worked for a firm my son used to be associated with. When his name came up in the filing, I recognized it immediately. I started pulling every document connected to that address." He looked at me directly. "I should have come to you sooner. I kept hoping I was wrong." I asked him if his son had been involved this time. He said no. His son was out of that world, but the paralegal had learned from people who'd learned from people, and the scheme had the same fingerprints. He'd reported the paralegal to the state bar before he came to find me. We sat together for a while without talking, 2 old men in a quiet diner in a New Hampshire winter, each of us carrying the particular weight of a parent who has been failed by a child. There was nothing to say about it that made it smaller or more manageable. We drank our coffee and watched the snow move across the parking lot outside. The arrests came on a Wednesday, 11 days later. My son was taken into custody at his office in Boston. His daughter-in-law was arrested the same morning at their condo. The paralegal had already been cooperating with investigators for a week in exchange for a reduced charge, and his cooperation had filled in the details that made the case airtight. The developer who had been waiting on the property transfer was under investigation for similar schemes in 3 other states. I watched the news that evening, sitting in Clara's chair by the window. The local coverage ran my son's photograph, his face caught between the moment of surprise and the moment of understanding that surprise was no longer useful. I recognized the jaw. I recognized the shoulders. I recognized the way he held himself, and I had to look away. My daughter called from Oregon 20 minutes after the news broke. She had known something was wrong for months, had noticed that my son had positioned himself as the one managing Dad's financial stuff, and had been quietly worried, but had not wanted to cause family conflict over a suspicion she couldn't prove. She cried for a long time on the phone. I told her the land was fine, the house was fine. Her half of everything she'd always been promised was still hers. She asked if I was all right. I told her I didn't know yet, which was the most honest answer I had. The court proceedings stretched over several months. I won't recount all of it. What mattered was that the fraudulent mortgage was voided. The false will was struck from the probate record, and the power of attorney was declared invalid. My son pleaded guilty to fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. He received 8 years. His daughter-in-law, who had known and said nothing, received 3. The paralegal received 2 years probation and a permanent bar from legal work. I went to see my son once, about 4 months after sentencing. The visiting room was the kind of place that makes everything feel both smaller and larger than it should. He looked older. The confidence that had been so much a part of him since his 20s had settled into something quieter and less certain. He was wearing it the way a man wears clothes that no longer fit. I sat across from him, and I asked him why. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he'd been in debt for years, the kind of debt that accumulates quietly and then all at once becomes impossible. Business investments that hadn't worked out, a standard of living that had outpaced his income, a pride that had prevented him from admitting either to anyone, especially to me. he said when the developer approached him about the property. What struck him first was how easy it seemed. The land was worth far more than I would ever spend. I was going to leave it to both of them anyway. He was just accelerating the timeline. In his mind, he said it the way people say things they have rehearsed but stopped fully believing. I asked him if he understood what he had done to me. Not the money, not the property. What he had done to the version of my life in which I still trusted my own family. He looked at his hands. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and I think he meant it. At least the part of it that was about getting caught. I told him I forgave him. I said it plainly, without drama. Not because the thing he had done was forgivable in some easy transactional sense, but because I'd watched Clara spend her whole life carrying grace toward people who hadn't earned it, and I thought that if I could carry even a fraction of that, it would be something worth carrying. I told him forgiveness didn't mean I would be back. It didn't mean the relationship was restored. It meant I was setting the weight of it down because I had enough years left to spend them better than dragging hatred across them. I stood up and walked out. I have not been back. The following spring, I had my attorney draft a new will. The land, all 160 acres, will pass to a conservation land trust when I'm gone. The farmhouse and the furniture and Clara's things will go to my daughter. My son will receive enough to stand on his feet when he comes out, because Clara would have wanted that. Nothing else. Harold Fitch comes over on Tuesday mornings now. We drink coffee on the porch if the weather allows it, and in the kitchen if it doesn't. He is a careful, honest man who has made peace with the fact that doing the right thing is rarely comfortable and almost never clean. We don't talk about our sons often. When we do, it is the way you talk about whether you've survived, with a kind of grim clarity that has nothing left to prove. I am back in the tool shed most mornings. The lathe runs again, the chisels are sharp, and the small wood stove keeps the cold outside where it belongs. Clara's gardening tools still hang on the south wall. I've left them there. I'm not ready to move them, and I'm not sure I ever will be. Last week I finished a rocking chair in white oak, the good grain running straight from seat to back. The joints fitted so tight they needed no glue. I carried it up to the porch and sat in it as the sun came down over the hill behind the barn. The maple trees were leafing out, pale and new, the color they turn in May before the full green takes over. I have watched this land change through 40 springs, and it still makes me feel something I don't have a word for. Gratitude that is bigger than the word gratitude. I'm sharing this story because I think about the people who don't have a Harold Fitch, the people who moved the firewood before the snow fell, who signed the papers before they understood what they were signing, who never found out until it was too late. The people who trusted their own blood and had no stranger in a hardware store to set them right. I got lucky, and I know it. If you are listening and you are older and you own something worth taking, listen to your instincts when they speak to you, even if they are telling you something you don't want to know. Good people are not naive people. Trusting your family is not the same as refusing to ask questions when questions need asking. The land I almost lost had been in my family for 3 generations, and it will outlast all of this. That matters. Some mornings I walk the fence line the way I've done my whole life, checking the posts, watching the deer trails at the tree line, listening to the creek that runs along the eastern edge of the property. Clara used to say that land remembers everyone who has ever loved it. I believe that now more than I did before. I can feel my grandfather in these fields, and my father, and Clara most of all, her hands in the soil, her voice in the wind coming off the hill. The rocking chair is still on the porch. I sit in it every evening when the work is done. That is enough for me. That is everything.